business or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Valuations Podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the premier business intelligence platform for the wealth management industry. My name is Mike Langford, and I am the host of the Valuations Podcast. And this episode sounds like it should be boring, but it's not. It's actually a very exciting, engaging, and extremely interesting and valuable episode of the podcast, because today, joining me is Ivan Barretto, and he's one of the co-founders of RIA Compliance Concepts, based right here in Austin, Texas. And I promise you, you're going to get a lot out of this podcast. Like, for instance, we dive into why it is incredibly important to do a compliance review, kind of some due diligence on your compliance section of the business, if you will, before you go acquiring or looking to sell or transition your business, because compliance done incorrectly or not done at all can really be a problem. Right? We're in a highly regulated industry and compliance matters. And so what really prompted this podcast with me and Ivan, and why I wanted to have Ivan on the show, is that Ivan and I have known each other for a few years. And I wrote a blog post not too long ago over on the Truelytics blog, so blog.truelytics.com, really talking about why I view compliance as a strategic partner for the business. And right now, in this period in time, when the business is evolving rapidly, you should be leaning on your compliance team to help you innovate, to help you take advantage of some opportunities. But too often, people look at compliance as the chief no officer, right? It's the department of no, where things and ideas and innovations go to die. And so I hear so often people use compliance as an excuse for why they just can't innovate. They can't move faster because, well, you know, we're a regulated industry and compliance would say no anyway, right? That is wrong. Compliance is really important, and it can be an asset. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Before we jump into the conversation with Ivan, as always, please do subscribe to the podcast over on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, you name it. Please also like and review the podcast. And then when you're done with that, kind of while you're listening, share this podcast out with some of your colleagues and business partners, because they need to hear what we're doing just like you do, right? This is really interesting stuff. All right, I'm not going to keep you much longer. As always, send in your ideas, your thoughts for the show. We'll cover more of that at the end. Now, here is Ivan. Let's do this. Welcome to the show, Ivan. It's really great to have you here. I've had you in mind for a guest for quite some time. Actually, it's funny because I wrote a blog post not too long ago over on the Truelytics blog. It's leveraging compliance as a business edge because, you know, as I mentioned to you in preparation for the show, I really do believe that compliance should be viewed as a strategic partner and not just as a lot of people look at it as the chief no officers within an organization. So I'm really thrilled to have you here, and we'll dive into a whole bunch of areas. So thank you very much for making yourself available. It's great to have you on the show.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting us on, or inviting me on. You're absolutely right. I mean, compliance, having the right compliance consultant firm to help your practice is definitely a key to helping, offset some of, the responsibilities, or helping you grow your business and focusing your time on doing what you're passionate about. Right. So, no, I absolutely agree with you that having the right people and the right, vendors to help your business grow, and trusted vendors to help your business grow is an absolute key to success in definitely in the industry. So.
That's fantastic. I agree. So, hey, before we dive into some of our kind of the topics we have, we chatted about, and we have in our notes here, I thought it might be a good to kind of do the old IMDb journey for you. Like I always say, I joke about that about every single podcast. Your internet movie database, like your career, like what other movie was this guy in, right? So you have a regulatory background as well. Before you were one of the founders of RIA Compliance Concepts, you have a pretty vibrant background in compliance and regulation. So I thought maybe you could give the audience a little bit of the background so that they really understand, like, you bring a lot of mojo to this conversation.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, ultimately, at some point in your life, you have kind of a general idea of what your career path is going to go, or how it's going to go, right? When you go to college and go to grad school, but you kind of float in the wind when you're trying to determine what you want to do for your life, right? If you had asked me earlier in my earlier years, what if I wanted to be an auditor or compliance consultant, I would have said, honestly, what is an auditor? What's a compliance consultant? But ultimately, sometimes things just happen for a reason. And when I went to school, in college and grad school, I ultimately knew that I always wanted to help some people in some way, shape, fashion, or form, or whatnot. But I also wanted to incorporate my education into whatever I was doing. When I got out of grad school, I had a general sense that I wanted to work in government. I got my master's in public administration at the College of Charleston. And I decided, I wanted to move back home, back to Texas. So I moved to Austin, obviously the state capital, best place to find a government job. And I came across this, the Texas State Securities Board, and started my career as a financial examiner. It's funny, when you start out in any career, sometimes just your calling, finds you, and it was a good fit for me. And I enjoyed my time as a financial examiner, and I just wanted to pursue that going forward in the private industry, and worked as a consultant, and eventually starting our own consulting firm. So
that's really exciting. It's interesting to me when somebody has been inside government and then they go outside. I always think of the former district attorney that goes into private practice, right? And now is the defender.
Yeah, exactly. And my approach has never really changed from when I was an examiner. Obviously, when I was an examiner, I would help guide advisors. I was more in a consulting capacity at that time too, because I was trying to guide new advisors that had just gotten started out in the industry, just to keep them aware of what compliance issues they need to be aware of, and how to document things properly, because that's what they typically want to do, is they want you to get on the right track. That's why they see you the first year or two of operation. They want to point you in the right direction. Right. And that's typically how it, 97% of my time at the state was acting in a guidance and, consultant capacity as an examiner. Obviously, I do have the enforcement of rules behind me. So, I can let them know, hey, you're not compliant because of the statute or whatever. But, and it just translated well into the consulting, my consulting positions, and helping in the same role, but not in the private sector. So,
you hit upon something that's pretty interesting there, I think, is that very often, and I alluded to this in the intro, right, mm-hmm. that a lot of people look at the compliance officer as the chief no officer, somebody who just says no and tells you all the things you can't do. And it breeds this adversarial mindset, right? Uh-huh. That, I'm in the business. You're the person who's going to try to stop me from doing business. I hate you.
Yeah.
Type of thing. And I think sometimes, and I see this very frequently, that people view regulators as the same way. But when you stop and think about what are the regulators' job, right? The regulator's job is to protect the consumer, right? The financial consumer. And in the case of on the investment side, it is the investor, right? So uh-huh. make sure that investors aren't getting defrauded and hoodwinked, if you will. And also that regulator's job is to make sure we have a vibrant and trustworthy market, right? So the reality is all of our businesses depend on the financial consumer trusting us with their money. And if that trust breaks down, as you've seen in the past, right? The rise, the SEC was born out of the Great Depression, right?
Yeah.
People looked and said, oh, we can't trust these banks. We can't trust these people with our money anymore. And everybody said, you know what? Maybe we need to make sure that we're trustworthy. So there's why the regulators are there. So they are our partners, but even more so within the organization, whoever you're using for compliance, whether that's an internal compliance professional or external compliance professionals like yourselves, that person's there to help you succeed. And that kind of leads into, the next topic I had for is that, why should advisors and broker dealers explore using an external compliance firm like RIA Compliance Concepts? Because in the blog post that I mentioned at the outset, I looked at like many of the firms that we've worked with over the years, and they absolutely could use help, right? Because more often than not, there was a compliance professional inside the organization of like 80 people. Sometimes there's only one compliance person. That person's overwhelmed. They can't think strategically. Some of these individual advisors are doing the DIY approach, right? They're just, I'm going to be my own compliance officer and wing it, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you can kind of shine some light on like, what are the values that you bring and your firm brings as an outside consultant to an operation?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, bringing an outside person, a fresh set of eyes to look at, your compliance program is always a plus, right? With that being said, having someone at least on the standby to answer any questions that you may have, that when you come across something that you're not too sure of regarding the rules and regulations, to have someone on the side that knows what those are or can give you the right answers is always a plus. Because what you're going to find in compliance is there's some things that are black and white, right? But there's always going to be a gray area on certain things. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the industry, depending on who you work for, there are some very conservative firms out there that won't let you do certain things that are being done in the industry. I mean, I've come across clients that have worked with broker-dealer firms and RIA firms that won't let them do financial planning. Just won't let them do it because they don't, number one, they're very conservative and they don't want to, take on the added compliant or, adjustment to their compliance program to advise, supervise that activity. But at the same token, there's kind of like you said, some of these advisors that work at some firms that are very conservative, they're beaten down on things that they think they can't do. And it's not necessarily true. I mean, you can do pretty much anything you really want to, as long as you have it addressed in your compliance program, right? And you have a supervision built in to supervise that type of business activity for the firm. You can do it, but you just have to put that in place for you to do it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's part of the stigma of sometimes working with a bigger firm that, may have a more conservative approach. And we come across that all the time. We get those questions. My previous firm wouldn't let me, do financial consulting or planning. And can I do that? And absolutely, you can. As long as you have it addressed in your compliance program, you can definitely do it.
I think it's so important that you mention that because, again, it gets back to that the mindset of like, I can't do this because of compliance. And the reality is, well, no, there's lots of stuff you can do, but it does require some compliance coordination, if you want to call it that, right? And some oversight, whether it is financial planning or social media usage. I hear that a lot in my business, right? Like, we can't use social media. The compliance won't let us. It's like, well, that's because compliance doesn't want to make the investment in making sure things are getting archived and supervised properly.
Correct.
That's really what it is, right? Yeah. And they haven't taken the real, the real job of compliance, right, is to make sure that the firm is never going to be in a position where they could be held accountable for defrauding investors or misleading investors, right? That's what, the SEC and FINRA are really, really interested in, state regulators, really interested in protecting the investor. So as long as you're putting things in place to make sure that people aren't getting ripped off, usually you're pretty good, right? That you're not breaking some pretty hard and fast rules, like, promising returns and all that type of stuff. Coordinate or related to that, what are some of the what you would say are some of the most common compliance roadblocks that slow down advisors or broker dealers or RIAs? Or what do you see in your travels? Are the things where like they just go, I don't even know how to get moving, or they're just like stopping on something psychologically or culturally?
I mean, it's always that fear of the unknown. I think that's one of the biggest things for compliance roadblocks for some advisors that want to start out on their own. That's a common thing that we come across with advisors that are planning to break away and start their own shop. They don't know what they don't know, right? And that scares the bejesus out of them sometimes, because they've relied on their compliance department or other vendors to help them, take care of that for them. So the common things that most advisors I come across is just the fear of unknown and uncertainty about how do I address this, whether it's compliance, or how do I address, my archiving solution, because I relied on my broker dealer to archive my stuff, and, what's the cost and all of that stuff. So those are some of the compliance roadblocks that we come across, is just the fear of unknown and how they're going to address their compliance program going forward. Now, with that being said, like I said, in having an outsourced consultant at least guiding you through the initial setup process, and having them on speed dial to answer questions is always a plus to any advisor or broker dealer that's just starting out.
That's interesting. I love that concept of like helping people get over the fear of the unknown, right? Because I think all of us experience that in our business, right? Occasionally you're looking at something like, oh, I really want new results, or I've hit a plateau in my business. I got to go to the next level. But it is that anxiety of taking on something that it feels risky, or it feels like I'm going to have to invest a lot of time and energy coming up to speed on this thing. And, very often advisors get knocked on this. And I don't think it's true. I mean, a lot of times people say, oh, advisors aren't very technical. And I usually correct people saying, no, they're very technical. I mean, they use technology all the time in their business. It's when you've been in business for a long time and then somebody wants you to adopt a new technology, you start asking yourself about the incremental benefit, right? Like, what is the new benefit to this, and how much work is it going to take? Is it going to disrupt my existing business and so forth? And it sounds to me like, what you're saying is you view your role as like a partner, right? As somebody who can say, hey, let me make this easier for you. Let me take some of the unknown off your shoulders and show you how to navigate to new heights in your business.
Correct. I mean, ultimately helping them manage your compliance program efficiently, providing them guidance on the do's and don'ts, just to be aware of that stuff. That's definitely something that I help most of my clients and prospective clients. I try to educate them as much as possible, because ultimately this is an important decision for most of the advisors that we work with that are breaking away and starting out, starting their own practice, is just being able to educate them and feel comfortable knowing as much as they possibly can to help their practice succeed.
So, one of the things we did earlier this year for Trulytics was we created our predictions for the 2019 for the wealth management industry. And my prediction was that advisors are going to begin to embrace online video to a really, really large extent, because what we've seen with video is engagement rates on social, for example, are like 10x any other medium, right? You post a video, you're going to get a lot of views, you're going to get a lot more comments, and you'll get a lot more inbound leads and engagement because video resonates, right? Everybody's carrying around a full HD screen in their pocket at all times, so people love video. Does RIA compliance concepts, do you offer advice on how to use social media and how to incorporate things like online video into your business, into your marketing and communications infrastructure, and what should people do from an archiving or from an approval process and so forth? Is that the type of services you offer?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we review content, video content, obviously prior to publishing. We work with our clients just to review the transcripts, make sure they're not making any misleading statements, promissory statements, all of that stuff. So yes, absolutely. We help, review any kind of video marketing that a client may pursue to help them grow their business, to help them make sure that they have the proper disclosures in place and they're archiving it correctly, have a system to archive this for their advertising and marketing folder. Because the reality is that when an auditor comes in and audits you, that's one of the things that they ask for. They ask for, what have you done for advertising, marketing purposes? And now they made the change last year where if you're an RIA, SEC or state registered RIA, you have to list your, not only your website, but also your social media channels you use to market for the business in your, Part 1A disclosure on the IRD system. So it's on the radar for the regulators that they're going to start diving in more and more to looking at your social media content to ensure that you're not misleading the public, the general public. With that being said, I mean, we can definitely guide most of our clients through that process of, okay, here's the steps you need to take to make sure that, you have this reviewed, have the proper disclosures in place, and you have it archived. And we definitely help with that. That's something we definitely help.
That's great to hear because, I mean, to me, and again, this is near and dear to my heart, right? It's, the operative message that I try to share with people is like, look, it's not as difficult a hill to climb as you think it is, right? Mm-hmm. It's relatively easy to produce content. It's relatively easy to distribute content. And frankly, it's relatively easy to make sure you're compliant, right? The technology tools are there. And then the services like RIA compliance concepts are there to help. I'd be remiss while we're on the valuations podcast to not ask this one, which was also in our predictions. One of the predictions is we're going to start to see more and more business transitions happening, right? So more mergers and acquisitions activity, due in large part to the aging of the advisor population. Many advisors are 60 years old or even older now. So they're starting to be on that final few holes of their career, if you will, looking for the exit. And you've got the younger guard looking to grow their business. And many of them are looking to grow their business via acquisition. Do you have any suggestions for the kind of the core compliance concepts to think of before you get to the negotiating table, if you will, to think about selling your business to somebody else or acquiring somebody else's book of business?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, due diligence is the key. Having a proper due diligence process in place to looking at everything related to the business that you're acquiring. It's very crucial to know the ins and outs of, the firm that you're potentially going to acquire, especially from a compliance perspective, because I've seen in my career some clients that buy a book that is basically, they haven't done their due diligence, proper due diligence in place, and they purchased a firm that had some pending regulatory actions on their, on their plate. And, ultimately when they purchased the book, they became responsible for those. So you definitely want to look at, as part of your due diligence process is ask the right questions, do your own background checks on FINRA, FINRA's broker check and IAPD or Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website on not only the firm, but also the individuals associated with it, right? The investment advisor reps or broker dealer or registered reps that are associated with it, just to see, is there a history of reg actions that are customer complaints or stuff like that. Those are some of the things you want to document to assist you in determining whether to buy that book of business or not. And then also the part that we come across all the time during this transition, you definitely want to have a good, transition phase where you're introducing the new owner that has acquired the business and making sure that transition takes place where the clients get to know the new people that they will be working with.
I think that is some of the, I hadn't really thought about that in the depth that you just covered it. And it's so true. It's like when you're acquiring a business, you're acquiring all of the business. You're acquiring the business's reputation, its branding, but you're also acquiring its debts. And those can be debts in the form of financial debts, right? Like
Correct.
somebody has a loan out on a business, but it also can be regulatory debt, right? Or some of the things or frankly, or their lack of compliance debt, right? So when you acquire a business and maybe that business has never had regulatory action or on it, but suddenly you acquire it and there's a history of not archiving social or doing some things kind of a little, slippery when it comes to being compliant.
Exactly.
And then you get the regulatory examination, you could be in trouble, right? You're on the hook for that stuff. You can't just say, well, that happened before I bought this. It's like, no, you own the firm now.
Yeah,
you're responsible for the firm stuff. So that's really, really smart and insightful perspective there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen it go sideways for some clients in the past that they thought they were buying a clean book of business, and turns out they never disclosed, and it turned out to be some awful legal battle mess that the client had to go through with not only the regulators but also the firm that misled them and to thinking that they were buying a clean book of business. And it cost the client a lot of money.
Wow.
So you definitely want to do your due diligence and have the proper, tools in place with your agreement and that you're to buy the book, and having some provisions in there to protect you and all of that stuff. But, just doing your due diligence, that's the biggest thing that I can offer for people that are, and you're right. I mean, the industry is starting to age out, and you're going to see more succession planning for a lot of older advisors that are ready to hang it up and ride off into the sunset or retire on a desert island or whatever. So this is going to be a more of an interesting topic in the future, because this is definitely going to happen quite a bit. So.
That's great. And now, is that, by the way, sorry to put you on the spot on this one, but is that the type of due diligence that you help somebody with? Like, so if a firm if somebody is considering acquiring a book of business, whether it's a solo advisor acquiring another solo advisor's business or an RIA acquiring another one, is that something that you and your team do, or you come in and say, hey, look, before you make this acquisition and enter into this transaction, let us help you do a bit of a compliance examination and make sure that everything's clean before you go through with the transaction? Is that something you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can definitely look, at the very least, we can do some background checks on the firm, the advisors, all the representatives. We can do, a cursory gap analysis to make sure their compliance programs in order, or if there's any gaps we need to address, we definitely do that. As far as the other stuff, the important stuff like the financial valuation and all that stuff, we recommend they have to use someone else for that.
But I recommend they use Truelytics for that stuff. That's what Truelytics is.
Yeah, exactly. Truelytics, or use Truelytics to help with the valuations of the book and all of that stuff. But yeah, we can definitely help with assessing the current state of their compliance, the firm, the book, the business that you're buying, the firm's compliance program and all of that stuff. Yeah, that's something we can offer.
That's fantastic. All right. So now comes my one of my most fun questions. Anytime I have a service provider on the show, can you share maybe an interesting story of a compliance emergency that could have been avoided with some preparation, right? I talk to advisors and I ask that. Most advisors haven't had that many, financial advisory emergencies, but occasionally one happens, right? Spontaneous divorce, or somebody passes away, or a variety of different things, or a business breakup or something. But, in your case, have you ever had the one where it's like, the emergency phone call and it's like all hands on deck to come in and put this fire out?
I mean, if it's a serious problem, I typically just defer them directly to letting them know, hey, you probably need to contact an attorney for this. I mean, ultimately, that's, if I assess it and they're telling me something, this is problematic or there's a major issue, most of the time I defer that over. Hey, you need to go seek counsel for this.
So what would be an example of that? Like they've been, the SEC sent them a letter saying, we think you defrauded investors, as an example.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, obviously, if it's something like that where they've stormed the gates and they've showed up in your office and start, seizing documents and all that stuff, obviously, yeah, you're going to want to go get an attorney involved. Most of the time, I mean, I can speak of a time when I was a regulator of an interesting topic of, something, a kind of an compliance emergency that could have been avoided had the people done their proper due diligence on an investment, recommendation that they made. In one particular case, this former, firm, had they done their due diligence, they would and did a Google search. I'm not talking about an FBI background search, just a Google search on the owner of a company. Had they done that, they would immediately known not to do business or offer or get involved in this type of investment vehicle, because if they'd done that, they would have seen this person had served time in federal prison. And
oh, wow.
Just by even Googling someone's name, like that's part of the process for some that we recommend for most our clients, that with some of their vendors that they choose to use the owners and the company set up Google alerts to let automatically send you information about that person or that vendor, so you can kind of if something traumatic happens, you'll immediately get an email letting you know, hey, ABC company, there's an article about them doing something wrong or whatever, right?
That's really smart.
But with that being said, had they done just a Google search of this guy, and this isn't that time where, internet's been around forever. Google is a big thing. If they had just done a Google search on the individual themselves, they would have found, hey, this guy's served time in the federal federal system for defrauding and stuff. Anyway, those are some of the things that if they just had the common sense, hey, I'll do my due diligence. Let's look at the owners of this firm and search them and look at and see if there's anything that we can find on Google. They could have avoided the heartache and the issues that they came across when the hammer came down on them. So
that's a really smart suggestion. It's interesting because I also make the recommendation to advisors and to wealth management firms they're larger, like Google yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Go out there and see like what shows up on page 1 of Google, because by the way, that's what prospective clients see, or that's what your existing clients see. And I had a story of one advisor who missed out on a $30 million client because he had a kind of a tough separation with his prior firm. He left a wirehouse that he went independent to wirehouse, didn't like the wirehouse scenario, left wirehouse, went back independent, and the wirehouse is like, well, you can't take your clients with you. And it was a bit of a battle. Yeah. And so there's just some negative press about it. There was no regulatory action on him. He didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. But when you Googled his name, page 1 of Google is several mentions of this. Yeah. And, the lawsuit by the big firm of the little guy and all this type of stuff. Yeah. And it cost him a $30 million client. It's like, make sure you're aware of that, because there are things you can do to improve in those things that, in the case that you described, you don't do business with those people because they're criminals.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
This is an interesting kind of, as we're kind of on the tail end here, getting ready to wrap it up. But it's funny when I think about your business. I think of your business as being very similar to the way I describe an advisor and their role to the client, right? I always say that advisors are the steady hand at the wheel for their clients' financial lives, because your job is to take some of the emotion out of it, right? And to make sure that there's not a bunch of irrational decisions being made, panic moves. I kind of see you as potentially having the same role for firms that have a solo compliance officer or they're doing the DIY approach. Do you kind of feel that way about it, that you kind of come in and like, I'm a level head, we help you navigate these waters here? Have you any scenarios where like you've kind of chilled clients out?
Yeah, absolutely. what most advisors need to look at, and this is something that, I wish there was a way we could preach this a little bit more, is when you're starting your own practice, you need to identify your strengths, right? So if your strengths are not compliance and you're a little bit, it's a weakness for your business, why would you want to try to manage that situation and channel your efforts to getting up to speed on that if you could have a subject matter expert helping you, guide you, or assist you with that area that you're weak on, right? So that's something that I think most advisors need, whether it's compliance or anything else. They need to focus on what they're good at and and what they're passionate about and what you love. I have a job and our firm has business because we have clients, and I'm going to be quite frank, that don't want to do compliance. They just don't want to do it. They don't want to take the time. With that being said, they want to help. They want help with it and feel a little bit at ease that there's someone that knows what they're doing, helping them managing their compliance program and assisting and providing guidance with it. So as long as you take that approach and you can find the right partner to help you with compliance, that helps ease the tension that some advisors, solo advisors, have about their business. And
That's smart.
And if you want to do the DIY approach, there's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. If you really want to channel your effort in that, but I do recommend, if you're going to do that, you're going to come across questions. I guarantee you that you're going to come across some form of question that you're going to have. It's good to have someone on retainer or on speed dial or that you can trust to answer, talk to about your questions about compliance. Because like I said earlier in the podcast, there are certain things that are black and white, but there are some gray areas in compliance.
It's funny. And that's almost the exact same value proposition that every advisor will preach to a potential client of why would I have somebody else manage my assets? Why would I have somebody else managing my finances? Like, well, your time is probably better spent making money instead of figuring out how to manage the money you've made. Also, what are the consequences of you doing a poor job because you are not a professional money manager? Well, in the case of the advisor, what are the consequences of you doing a poor job from a compliance perspective? Since you are not a professional compliance officer, you don't have the years of experience and the breadth of knowledge. What are the potential pitfalls and so forth? So I thought that's a really smart perspective on it. Kind of closing it out here. What are some of or do you have any important compliance trends for the year or issues facing broker-dealers, wealth management firms, or individual advisors in 2019? Do you have any? These are our predictions for 2019 or things you need to focus on?
Oh, I mean, the biggest things the common things that you guys, the future trends in the industry, basically we kind of touched on this earlier, was most of the clients now are aging out. Right. And that's going to lead to senior vulnerability and financial exploitation cases that we're going to see. We've already seen something recently in the news with Stanley being financially exploited by his managers and relatives and whatnot. That trend is not going to stop because the reality is the general population is the baby boomer generation is starting to age out, and this is going to be a more prevalent problem in the near future. Having firms address that in their compliance procedures, as far as knowing when to identify or look for risks, issues with certain clients that meet that criteria as a senior vulnerable person, identifying diminished capacity, identifying, that they're being exploited by a relative, caregiver, or whatnot. Those are some things that you want to build into your policies and procedures, and have training with your staff that's servicing these types of clients, and understanding when it's time to pull the trigger to potentially report it. Because the reality is, in certain states, jurisdictions like Texas, you are deemed a mandatory reporter. You have to report this. It's the law. and then having a better grasp of understanding that. That's one of the biggest trends that I see in the near future. Cyber is always a big problem. Everyone in the industry now is doing some form or using some form of vendor electronically to help with their practice, whether it's a CRM program, obviously you're a custodian that you're using to custody client assets. Basically everyone's using some form of electronic means to help manage their practice. With that being said, and you're going to see a bigger trend in the future that some of these state regulators are starting to adopt regulation that requires them to have policies and procedures to have address cybersecurity breaches or cybersecurity prevention, threat prevention, and have policies and procedures to address this. So that's something that I definitely think is not going away. I think it's going to be more prevalent going forward. But as far as that's concerned, I mean, the social media aspect, marketing, that's a big uptick too, because they're starting to dive into that now. So I see that becoming more of a prevalent compliance trend in the future as well, making sure you have the proper disclosures in place and with all your social media channels you're using and website and all of that stuff. So those are kind of the main trends that we see going forward are going to be potential issues for advisors and broker dealers.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you very much, Ivan, for that insight. As we close it out here, I'm sure people are going to want to hear more from you, be able to learn more about RIA compliance concepts. Would you mind sharing, how can people follow up with you, kind of keep track of you and reach out to you if they need to?
Yeah, of course. Obviously anyone interested in our company and our services and wants to discuss how we can be of assistance, you can reach out to us via our website, www.riacc.io. We also have, we're all on most of the social media channels except for Google Plus, which, I guess is been taken away.
Pour one out for our homie Google Plus.
Exactly. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We do have our own podcast. We just started. We just finished up season 1 in the end of December. The RIA Compliance Collective. That's available on most podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes. And we're working diligently on season 2. And Mike, I hope you take us up on our offer to be a guest speaker on our podcast.
I'm totally there. It's going to be exciting. Yeah, I love what you're doing with the podcast. And I particularly love, and we were talking about it at the beginning here before we started recording, your little snippets that you post via social there. Those are fantastic. So I really do encourage anybody listening to the Valuations podcast to head over and listen to the RIA Compliance podcast. It'd be great. Well, very cool, Ivan. Thank you very much once again. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate this. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Huge thanks to Ivan Barretto of RIA Compliance Concepts for joining me today. Make sure you do check out their podcast, RIA Compliance Collective. It is really well done. I have to say, I've listened to a couple of episodes, really enjoy it. Hey, also, take Ivan up on that tip there that he mentioned. That make sure you go Google, number one, Google yourself. That's my tip. Google yourself, Google your firm, set up Google alerts for yourself and for your firm so that in the event that somebody mentions you or something is written about you or your firm and it's placed online, Google Alerts will alert you to the fact that that happened. And then go Google some of your vendors, Google some of your clients, right? Make sure everything's on the up and up because you'll be surprised at what comes up on page 1. You really want to make sure that you're aware of who you're doing business with. Lastly, if you have questions, you have topics, you have suggestions for what we cover on the podcast for future episodes, please do hit us up, valuations@truelytics.com, or hit us up on the socials, right? We're Truelytics everywhere. You can also shoot stuff to me. I'm at Mike Langford on just about every other social media platform as well. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and we will see you next time on the Valuations Podcast. Have a good one. Bye.